Alright guys, I'm going to show you how to set up the R31 chassis for
Here are the
countersteering.
tools you'll need. Camber gauge for touring cars, ride height gauge, 1.5mm tool, and a turnbuckle tool.
The way I get started when I'm working on my setup is I want to go ahead and look for my droop screws. I'm going to go right here, right inside there, and I'm going to unscrew this until it's no longer interfering with the ride height or anything to do with touching the bottom deck. I'm going to do the same on everything all the way around. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set up my ride height so it's equal all the way around. And the way you do that is not setting it by the droop screws because that affects something else. The way you do it is by the adjustment on the collars right here. This one right there. This one right here. And the ones on the back as well. I'm also going to go ahead and state that my shock dampers are sitting straight up in the front, and in the backs I have them on the second hole from the outside. I'm going to get started setting up my ride height. Bring my chassis forward. I'm going to slide my ride height gauge. What I'm looking for, I'm going to try to do 6.5. The reason I do all the way around for my ride height is because I'm accommodating the axles. I try to make sure that once everything is set up and the ride height is set, that my axles are as straight as possible. Because what happens, what a lot of people do, when they start putting a lot of camber on any of the front wheels, when you start steering in with the maximum angle, that's putting a lot of tension and stress on this little axle cup right here, and eventually that's why on some people they break. Let's go ahead and slide it in. You can pick a point. Just make sure you do it the same place every time. So when you're making adjustments, you have a point of reference for each time. Right now I'm sitting at 5. Alright, seeing that my ride height is lower than I actually want it to be, I'm going to go ahead and begin my ride height adjustment. Like I said, the way I do that is adjusting it by the collar right here. We're assuming at this point that you know how to make shocks. If not, ask me, I'll make a video on how to do that too. But we're going to assume the shocks are done correctly, and so I'm going to go ahead and start adjusting it by that. So give a push here and slide this in and see where I'm at. So this is reading at 4.5. I'll go ahead and I'm going to tighten my shock damper. Go ahead and do it a little bit on this side too, because I'm assuming it's around 4 or 5, 4.5. Okay, and give it a push in the front on the shock tower, and I'm going to see where I'm at. I'm reading 5.5. Okay, that's pretty good. Go push. Check this side. This one's reading 6. Okay, so I need to go more on the other side right here. So tighten up the shock collar. Okay, give it a push. Slide it in. Where am I at? Reading on 6 right now on this side, and reading 6 on this side. Gotta go just a little bit further, tightening up the shock collar. Okay, recheck it. It's 6 and 6 over here. You know what? We don't need 6.5. We'll just leave it at 6. So now I'm going to switch and check the backs. Alright, now this is where I'm going to use my 1.5 screwdriver again. Now, starting on the back, I'm going to compress it one more time. I'm going to get in there. Now, right here, I feel it dancing right above the 6mm mark. What I'm going to do is I tighten up my droop screw inside there. Here we go. As I tighten this up, I'm pushing this droop screw down. I'm going to be checking this ride height, making sure my ride height doesn't go lower than the 6mm gauge is at. Alright, I'm going to begin bringing down the droop screw. I'm moving this gauge back and forth, and as soon as I feel some tension on the chassis deck on top of my 6mm, I know to back it up some. I know that I've reached as far as I want to go on that gauge. Okay, I've done on that side. I'm going to do the same thing on this other side. Push it down, make sure I'm at the right place, sitting on top of 6. I'm going to lower my droop gauge and wiggle around my ride height gauge until I find it sitting right on top of the 6mm mark. So if you go too far, your droop screw will actually start to affect the ride height, and that's what we're trying to avoid. The goal is to have 6mm ride height all around with 0 droop all around.
That's the whole purpose of the droop screws. When you're adding droop to the chassis, what is actually happening is you're adding weight transitioning movement. The way this affects the chassis is when you're applying gas or brake, weight's going to be transitioning from the front to back or back to front. One useful tip that I would recommend for people, if you say you find the tail to be really swing happy, you might actually want to add perhaps maybe 1 or 2, 3 or 4 millimeters of droop in the rear, so that, let's say, every time you hit the brake and you feel the back is swinging out, instead of all the weight being back here and swinging out very heavily like a bat, the weight will transition to the front, meaning there'll be less weight back here. So instead of it swinging like this really fast, it's like holding it higher on the bat up at this point and swinging a lot more slowly. So now we have 0 droop all the way around with a ride height all around of 6 millimeters. Personally, on my setup, I'm going to go ahead and add 1 millimeter of droop in the rear. I just want it to be a little more stable. I think the car will look a little more realistic instead of it switching back super quick, which would be pretty good in a competition setting. But I'm tandeming with my friends, and I just want it to look really smooth and stable. I want it to look as realistic as possible. That's my goal. That's the whole purpose of countersteering. You want it to look as realistic as possible. When you're countersteering, you want to avoid what I call fish flippering. You don't want, like, you're countersteering going sideways and you see that I need to make an adjustment or a correction, and you end up going like this to fix your steering or fix your line. That's what you're trying to avoid. When your car's set up right, you won't have to do that, because every time you do that back and forth, it doesn't look realistic, and that's something you don't do in a real car. When you're in a real car drifting, and let's say you need the back to kick out a little bit more, you do it incrementally. You actually steer in a little bit. You're using very fine and very small adjustments on the steering control knob when you're countersteering. Say you're going sideways in this direction and you want to pull it in, make a tighter angle. You want a smaller trajectory. You steer in a little bit with the steering wheel, and actually that'll turn the whole car that way. Once you get the car moving that direction, you can go ahead again and apply full countersteer lock, because we try doing that as much as possible because it looks the best. You want to look like you're countersteering with full lock. Now that my ride height is set and my droop is set, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to tackle camber. I'm going to put my camber gauge right up to the wheel, and what you're looking for is where it sits, touching the bottom part of the lip. See, the bottom's touching well, but the front, I see that I have about maybe 2 degrees too much negative. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to adjust it on my turnbuckle right here. Grab my turnbuckle tool. Alright, my countersteer setup regarding my pulleys, I have a 39 in the front, 15 right here, this one's a 22, follow this line back here, this one's a 14, this right here is a 21, and this one right here is a 36.